It all started with the warnings on the news, the flashes of red across every screen TV, phone, computer, all of them blaring the same message. Evacuate to your nearest military bunker.
Do not wait. Do not hesitate.
The infection is spreading. Dr. Kate Morgan could barely breathe as she and a group of survivors rushed through the dense forest. The bunker's coordinates blinked on her GPS like a beacon of hope amidst the darkness.
Her mind was clouded with memories of her last patient, whose eyes had turned that sickly shade of red before he collapsed into violent seizures.
She pushed the thought away and focused on the task at hand, reaching the bunker before it was too late.
The entrance loomed before them, a massive iron door embedded in the earth, almost camouflaged by the overgrowth.
Sergeant Williams, a tall, grizzled man with the aura of someone who'd seen too much, punched in a code.
The door creaked open with a groan that echoed into the silent night, sending shivers down everyone's spine. One by one, they descended into the cold, dimly lit stairwell.
Kate felt the air grow heavy as they descended, like the weight of the world was pressing down on them.
She glanced at the others. Emma, a nurse who had been in the same hospital as her, Tom, a mechanic with grease still smeared on his hands, and Rick, a teenager who looked too young to understand what was happening, but had the hardened expression of someone who had already lost everything. As the door slammed shut behind them, the group was plunged into an eerie silence, broken only by the distant hum of machinery.
The bunker was supposed to be a refuge, the safe haven from the horrors outside. But Kate couldn't shake the feeling that they had just walked into a tomb. The bunker was a relic from the Cold War, built to withstand nuclear fallout.
Its interior was a labyrinth of narrow corridors, thick concrete walls, and heavy metal doors. The lights flickered as they walked, casting long, unsettling shadows on the walls.
Sergeant Williams led them to the control room, where a map of the bunker was displayed on an old monitor.
"We'll split up to secure the area," he ordered. "We need to make sure it's safe before we settle in." Kate was paired with Emma, the nurse, while Tom and Rick were sent to check the generators.
The bunker was massive, with multiple levels and hidden rooms that hadn't been used in decades. Kate and Emma's footsteps echoed through the empty halls as they inspected the medical bay.
"This place gives me the creeps," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "Just focus on the task," Kate replied, though she shared Emma's unease. The medical bay was well stocked with supplies, but everything was covered in a thin layer of dust.
It was clear that no one had been here in years. Kate's mind kept drifting back to the infection, how it had spread so quickly, how it had turned people into mindless, bloodthirsty monsters. She shook her head, trying to focus. They were safe now, underground, far from the horrors above.
But something gnawed at the edge of her consciousness, a nagging doubt that she couldn't shake. Hours passed as they settled into the bunker, each person claiming small room for themselves. The tension was palpable, but no one spoke about it. They were all too tired, too traumatized to confront their fears.
The first sign that something was wrong came during dinner.
Tom, the mechanic, was visibly shaking, his skin pale and clammy.
Kate noticed his hands trembling as he tried to eat, his eyes darting nervously around the room.
"Tom, are you okay?"
she asked, her voice filled with concern.
"I'm fine," he snapped, but his voice was strained. "Just tired. It's been a long day." But Kate wasn't convinced.
She had seen those symptoms before in the early stages of the infection.
She tried to push the thought away, but it lingered, gnawing at her like a hungry predator.
That night, as the others slept, Kate couldn't. She lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the bunker.
The hum of the generators, the distant drip of water from somewhere deep below, and the occasional creak of metal expanding and contracting in the cold.
And then she heard it, a faint, wet cough from the next room.
The next morning, Tom didn't join them for breakfast.
Sergeant Williams went to check on him and returned with a grim expression. "He's sick," the sergeant said, his voice low. "Looks like he caught something before we got here." Kate's heart sank.
"We need to isolate him."
"If it's the infection, we don't know that," Williams interrupted.
"It could just be a cold."
"We can't jump to conclusions." But Kate knew better.
She had seen this before.
The infection didn't start with the violent seizures and bloodlust. It started with a fever, shaking, and a cough. Tom was infected, and that meant the infection was already inside the bunker. They moved Tom to a makeshift quarantine room in the lower levels of the bunker, far from the others. Kate tried to treat him, but there was nothing she could do. The infection was a death sentence.
Over the next few days, Tom's condition worsened.
He became delirious, muttering incoherently, his skin turning a sickly shade of grey.
The others avoided the quarantine room, fear etched on their faces. They knew what was coming. but no one wanted to say it out loud.
The mood in the bunker shifted as the days dragged on. The air grew thick with tension, paranoia seeping into every corner.
The survivors barely spoke to each other, and when they did, it was in hushed tones, their voices laced with fear. Kate spent most of her time in the medical bay, researching the infection, trying to find a way to stop it.
But every test, every experiment, led to the same conclusion: there was no cure.
Tom's screams echoed through the bunker at night, a haunting reminder of what was happening to him.
The infection was consuming him from the inside out, turning him into one of the monsters they had fled from.
And then, one night, the scream stopped. Kate rushed to the quarantine room, her heart pounding in her chest.
The room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering bulb overhead. Tom lay still on the bed, his chest no longer rising and falling with breath. But Kate knew better than to let her guard down. She approached cautiously, her hands trembling as she reached for a flashlight.
She shined the light on Tom's face, and what she saw made her blood run cold. His eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling, but they were no longer human.
They were blood red, filled with a hunger that made Kate's stomach turn. And then, with a sudden, jerky movement, Tom lunged at her.
Kate barely managed to dodge Tom's attack, stumbling back against the cold metal wall. He was faster than he should have been, given his condition.
But this wasn't Tom anymore. The infection had taken over, turning him into a mindless predator.
She grabbed a metal pipe from the floor, holding it out in front of her like a weapon.
"Tom, please, if there's any part of you left, fight it." But there was no response, only a guttural growl as he lunged at her again. Kate swung the pipe with all her strength, hitting him square in the chest.
He staggered back, but it didn't stop him.
He came at her again and again, relentless in his pursuit.
Finally, with a desperate scream, Kate brought the pipe down on his head.
There was a sickening crunch, and Tom collapsed to the ground, motionless. Kate stood there, gasping for breath, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The infection had already taken Tom, but she knew it wouldn't stop there.
She had to warn the others.
But when she returned to the main area of the bunker, she found chaos.
Emma was on the ground, convulsing violently, her skin already turning grey. Rick stood over her, tears streaming down his face, unsure of what to do.
Sergeant Williams was trying to hold her down, but it was clear that she was too far gone. Kate's heart sank. The infection had spread. It was only a matter of time before they were all like Tom and Emma, mindless, bloodthirsty monsters.
Kate knew they couldn't stay in the bunker any longer.
The infection was spreading too quickly. They had to leave, find another safe place before it was too late.
But the bunker was a maze, and the infection had already claimed 2 of them.
Kate didn't know how many others were infected, how many had been exposed. Paranoia gripped her as she tried to come up with a plan. Sergeant Williams was the first to speak up.
"We need to destroy the bunker.
If we leave it intact, the infection will spread."
"We can't let that happen." Kate nodded in agreement, though the thought of blowing up the bunker made her stomach churn.
But Williams was right. They couldn't let the infection escape.
It was their only option. They gathered what supplies they could, avoiding the rooms where Tom and Emma had been kept.
The tension was palpable, each survivor eyeing the others with suspicion.
No one spoke, but they all knew what the others were thinking who would be next.
They set the charges in the lower levels, where the infection had first taken hold. As they worked, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the infection was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike.
Finally, the charges were set. They had just enough time to reach the surface before the explosion.
But as they made their way to the exit, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor.
Kate turned, her heart racing, to see Rick standing at the end of the hall, his eyes wide with terror. "It's in me," he whispered, his voice barely audible.
Before anyone could react, Rick's body convulsed, his skin turning that familiar shade of grey. He let out a blood-curdling scream as the infection took hold, and then he lunged at them, his eyes filled with madness. Sergeant Williams raised his weapon, but Rick was too fast. He tackled the sergeant to the ground, biting into his neck with a savage ferocity. Blood sprayed across the walls as Williams screamed in agony. Kate and Emma didn't wait to see what happened next. They turned and ran, the sound of the explosion reverberating through the bunker as they made their escape.
The ground shook beneath them, the walls crumbling as the bunker collapsed in on itself.
Kate and Emma emerged from the bunker, gasping for breath as they stumbled into the daylight.
The forest around them was eerily silent, the only sound the distant rumble of the earth as the bunker was swallowed by the explosion. They were the only survivors, but they knew their ordeal was far from over.
The infection was still out there, and they had no idea how far it had spread.
Kate looked at Emma, who was trembling with fear.
"We can't stop now," she said, her voice filled with determination.
"We have to find others. We have to warn them." Emma nodded, though her eyes were filled with doubt.
"But what if we're already infected?"
Kate didn't have an answer. All she could do was keep moving, keep fighting, keep hoping that somewhere, somehow, there was still a chance to stop the nightmare that had begun underground.
But as they walked through the forest, the shadows seemed to stretch out towards them, the darkness closing in from all sides.
Kate knew they were not safe. Not yet.
The infection was relentless, and it was only a matter of time before it caught up with them.
And so they walked on into the unknown, with the haunting realization that the true nightmare had only just begun.